Hi there, welcome to another stream. And like I have it in a title, in this stream we're going to be looking at how to make a game. Well, that's a pretty big topic, how to make a game in Unity using visual scripting, but the idea behind how to make a game is you want to actually break it down into smaller pieces. So for instance, if we're making a game something like this that I have here, you can't really just, well, I guess create a game or find exactly the way you can create this game on a tutorial, something like that, but you can find bits and parts of this game in tutorials. So that's what you want to do, is actually break down your game into a smaller pieces. So you break it up into smaller pieces. Then if you have a piece that is still to be big for you to actually achieve, you want to break it down even smaller to the next level. And in my game, what I have here is currently there's a task that you have to do, and currently it doesn't the task is not actually like pushing you anywhere, so the game actually needs a timer, and that's one of a smaller pieces that actually can break down from my game that I can actually look into how to create. So in this video, I'll be focusing on how to create a timer from scratch using visual scripting for the game, and then we can look into how to use it as a score. So that's a small, for me that's pretty small enough big piece to actually tackle, but if you're still like even the timer, if that's still a big task for you, you can break it down even more. And technically, when you're solving a problem, that is what you're doing. You're breaking down that timer even more in smaller pieces and taking it one step at a time to create it. So right here I have a HUD, which is this this part right there on the top that is displaying. Now I want to add a timer there. I have a count, an item, and let me duplicate this count. Count is the text mesh pro element, so this is actually my text, and the way that I'm thinking of displaying the time right now is in seconds, so, and have a 2 decimal places. I am not sure, might even have 1 decimal place, but let's just have a placeholder for 2 decimal places, and then we can actually remove this. So let's set timer, rename that, and change the layout a little bit for it to display all of the things that I need to display here. Move the item to the other side, and also the count, and let's make sure our count is not centered. So there, that's the layout for the timer that I want to do. And now what's the next step? The next step is actually try to create a timer, or not even create a timer, but see if there's an available solution that I can use. And for that, let's go actually and add a component here. I'll use a script machine, and I'll use an embedded added graph. And let me put the window up here. Added graph, and you can look for a timer. So let's say timer. And there is a timer option that we have here, and also some time options that we see. So that's what you want to do first, is look if there is already a unit or something like that that you can actually use for this. So timer is all good, but if you look at the timer here, it's actually is just increasing. Well, not increasing the value, is just you specify the duration, and then it will continue run until that duration is actually be met. So you could actually use a timer for, like, reuse this timer for my game as well. The way you would do that is by just increasing it, setting a very large duration, something that you'll never actually be able to get to. And this is going to be, okay, this can be used to just look at elapse time. So the elapse time is in seconds, and that's exactly what we are looking for. So for instance, we can say start, and I'll show you this solution first. But then if you actually want to create your own timer, for instance, if you actually want to subtract time or add time to it, then you would want to add your own timer for that. So on start, I'll start this timer, and then we have this tick. Tick is going to be triggered every update when the timer is running. So on tick, we can say set text, and since I'm using Text Mesh Pro, I have to use the set text of the Text Mesh Pro. So Text Mesh Pro, set text, and I'm looking for, so there's a lot of options. You can actually use Text Mesh Pro to format with different arguments, but right there I want to use set Text Mesh Pro value. So the elapse time is coming in float, and you want to actually convert it to a string. Let's do float to string. And when you do float to string, there's some options that you have here. So you can just do to string without any options, or you can use a format. So in our case, it's going to be very beneficial to actually use a format, since I want to actually display only 2 decimal places, and just use that one. The format is, you can actually look up in documentation for what format, how you format to string for a float, and it's going to show you that you can just use 0.00 to display the value that we want. Pass that as the text, and that's pretty much it. So this should actually give us that timer that we're looking for. Well, let's test it out and see if we are successfully running a timer. So right there, you can see that the timer is running. And now you have an option of either keeping that last one or not, because you can see that you can't really make out the last decimal point of the time. So you might as well just keep the one that you kind of can see what it is, that it's increasing. So let's actually change that in the format. Excuse me. And like that, we have a timer with using an existing timer that we have here. But then if you want to save this value after you complete the level, you need to actually have this value available somewhere public. So for that, we can either use a saved variable or a scene variable. So if you want to just save it in the current, for the current level, and then after the game is complete, then store it in the saved variable as the best scores or something like that. You can do that in the scene variable. So store this value in the scene variable first, and then after you complete the level, you look at that. But that's not what we're looking for right now. We're looking for a timer that you could actually have I guess a countdown timer instead. This timer will actually, you can use it as a remainder right there. A countdown timer. So I can switch to remainder, and if I say 50 seconds, I run that. We'll start with 50 seconds, and it's going to start decreasing. But if that's all you need, then sure, you can just use that. But if you want to add the ability of, like, each time you pick up an item, some time is going to be added back to you, so you can actually see it, have more time based on how much items you have to pick up, then that timer won't actually work. So let me actually switch this to my level selector instead. So let's then create our own timer that will be able to increase the time duration, if we need it. So like I said, that if you just need that simple timer, you can use this timer. You have the elapsed time and remaining time. But if you want to add some more options for it, for adding or subtraction time, like if you did something incorrect, you would subtract time. If you did, if you picked up the right item, then you actually add time, so you have longer time to actually finish the level. Then you'll have to create your own timer for that. And the task is not actually that complicated. So to create your own timer, you need to actually so first you need to figure out if you have a countdown timer or a count up. For a countdown, you would be just adding the previous time stamp to the current one. So for instance, timer. If we look for time, we have some values that we can get here. So we can get delta time. Time in Unity Engine. We have delta time, and you can see at the value that you get. So this interval is seconds for the latest frame to the current one. So this will return you that the delay or the time that has passed since the previous frame. So if you're just using the update event, you can use the delta time to add this delta. So basically the idea is if you add these delta time together, then you should actually get how long the timer has been running for. So if you're counting up, then you just need a variable then. Let's not use let's just use time. A variable, I'll just say float. So if you're using a count up, then you would just take the previous time. The initial value is at 0, and you say add. We can actually use a scalar here. So add time, add delta time, and set it back to the variable. So set time and get this added. And this is going to be the new timer. So you can actually switch from using that. Let's move it here. After we set delta time, we can save it and we can actually get that time to be displayed. So let's actually remove this timer and try it out. So this should be a timer that is going to go to the infinite. So let's select level, and as soon as we enter that level, we get the timer. So here's our own timer right now. It's going to get increased. Now, if that's the only thing you're looking for, then you might as well just use the existing timer. But for my game, I actually want to have a countdown timer. And that's a little bit different than a count up, in the sense that you're just looking for a subtraction. You're subtracting, and then you need to also check if it ever reaches 0. So let's do subtraction first. We get our current our starting time, and we subtract the delta time and save that. And then in here you can set what is your what time you're starting with. So let's say we'll give them 5 seconds to find the first item. So if we just do that and play the game, then when we start, we collect the first item, but you can see that the time is already in the negative. So one thing that we need to do is actually make sure that the timer will stop running when we are where we below 0, and just display 0. And then if we pick up any item, to make sure that we actually Why is the chat turned off? Live chat? No, the chat is on. For some reason I couldn't see the chat in my... Sorry guys. For some reason I wasn't able to see the chat, and I thought it's just no one is active, but it looks like there are some questions or something. Can you make a tutorial on top-down shooter? So sorry guys, but it looks like there wasn't any questions here. that I've missed. So where were we? Okay, so if you want to increase the time when you pick up an item, we want to add some custom things now. Let's go back here. If you need help, yeah, go post that on Discord, and maybe someone there's gonna help, or when I'll have time, I check the Discord and I help under questions. You can actually write some of the questions that you have. Okay, so first let's actually stop the timer once we have reached 0. So right here, before I set a variable, I want to actually check, make sure that it's the value is above 0. So greater. If it's greater than 0, then we're going to continue and save it, but for that we'll need an if. So if that is true, then we're going to continue with this logic. Otherwise, if it's false, we want to actually save 0. One thing that it'd be I mean, there's not that much of calculations that we're going to recalculate, but right here, if we just leave it like that, this subtraction is going to be done twice. So in visual scripting, if you don't want to do that subtraction twice, you can use a cache variable. So you can cache that value, and then you can use that cached value for comparison and stuff like that. So that's an option that you have here. Oops. Okay, so I'll pass it right there. That way, this calculations can be done only once, saved here in a variable. So this is the same thing as just a private temporary variable, or in temporary variable in code. If it's greater, then I'm going to do that, save this value. But if it's going to be less than, okay, then I want to save a 0. So you can either use a toggle by flow, or just use another set variable, since there's pretty much almost no logic that we have here. We can use that. We could use that, and in here we'll have to switch it from using the specific set variable, because you can't access this value unless unless you set that variable in the flow. So for instance, in our false state, it's actually gonna try to access this set variable, which it was never used, and it will throw you an error. So in that case, you just want to use the get variable instead. So like that. So we update the value, but in here we want to also run this only once, because if your game, it never actually gets out of the negative values. So once you reach 0, you never add any time back. Then you want to use a once once unit so that it will actually restart the timer. If you want to restart the timer, not that it won't restart the timer, but it won't keep rewriting 0 to our set text, because the values can be exactly the same. But if we just leave it running like that, then still each frame it's going to be actually updating this text. And even updating the text each frame, you probably don't want to do that. You might want to have a cooldown or something like that that updates the text, but for now we can just leave it like that. So this should stop the timer from going into the negative. So whenever the timer goes to 0 or a little bit below 0, it's actually going to run this logic right here and display the 0. Also, it's going to set the time to 0. Now, this is basic a timer, so we just, I guess, recreated the timer that we had there, and you can actually do some kind of trigger. I'll show that in a little bit, but let's see, make sure it actually works. So we got a timer, it reaches 0 and it should stop. So right there. And in here, you can actually do a sequence. If you want to do something else when the timer runs out, so you can update the value there. And then when the timer runs out, you can actually trigger like a game over or something like that. So that's an option there. And in here, if you want to now add time each time you like pick up an item or something like that, you want to add some logic. Now the logic should be triggered by, I guess, a custom event. So if you're just using Unity, then you want to add the custom event. And for this custom event, you can say add time, for instance, and you can actually pass in an argument if you want. For add time, it's pretty simple. It's instead of just using the get delta time, we can just get this value that we get here and then add a scalar. So add these two together, that will add time to us, and you get an option of passing so set time, you get the option of passing the value through this argument. So this is if you're just using visual scripting and you're not. Do you have a course somewhere? No, I have not. Well, just on YouTube. If you the courses that I have not made a separate course yet. Lately, I've been getting a lot of requests to make one, so I'm thinking about actually making one. So, but so you set the time, add and set the time, and that's pretty much it. Actually, if you pass in a negative value, so if you want to actually subtract time, you can pass in a negative value and it's not going to subtract the time. So this works for both. But I am using Spock, my unit collections, my custom unit collections that I have that simplify some things. And in here, I have a receive unit. And here I have a receive unit, which is not actually connecting this this event onto a specific object. So when you use a custom event, it actually connects the event to a specific object. So you need to have reference to this object to trigger that event. But the receive, it's a general, it triggers a custom event on any object that has the listener. So, but you can use the same approach here. So you can use you can duplicate this stuff. Do it like that. That is one option. But the other option you have is select and flow. So let me show that. So select on flow. You can pass in two flows inputs, but you want to trigger the same logic here. But you want to change which value is used to add, and you can pass in the value for this one and for B, and then use this value right there. So change on flow. Okay, looks like I missed that one. Okay, so A value and B value. And then this will actually let you merge these two flows with different values to run the same logic. But you can always duplicate it and not go through this. What's the difference between graph and embedded? So when you use embedded, the graph is actually stored on this object. And basically, if you duplicate this object, so for instance, if I add another timer and start modifying it in here, the graphs actually are going to be divergent. So they're going to be changing. It's going to be different. Where if I change it here, it's going to be different than with where I haven't changed it. So that's when you use embedded. It's actually attached. The graph is attached to the object. So only that object is going to have that graph. And you use embedded. I mean, you can use embedded in if you have just one object in the scene and you never reuse that object. If you use the object multiple times, so if you use a prefab, or if you're just copying and pasting it and you want it to use the same graph, you want to switch it to graph. Now, when you switch it to graph, okay, since I have the logic already, so you could switch it to graph when you're creating it if it's new. But since I have the logic already, then you actually want to run convert. So when you do convert, it's going to actually give you that option of creating a graph. So let me actually go to my template. And you can name your graph here. So I can name it timer, save. And now there is a file that it's referencing to. And now if any object that using that timer is going to actually use the same graph and same code. I go modified in one place and it's going to be different. It's going to be modified in every place that the timer is being used. So that's the difference. In my case, I can use a timer or a graph. It doesn't really matter. It's just you create that extra file and that file can be reused in other places. So it's always safer to use a graph actually. So if you're, there is just some changes. Well, there's some things that go on if you actually use a graph instead of timer. So for instance, let me minimize this window. So I switched it to graph right now, right? And now if I try to select an item from this window from the scene, you see that I have access onto assets. So you can't get access to any of the objects from the scene. So that's quite a common problem that you run into when you're working with graphs. And if you're even select an object or something like that, then you still can't get access to the scene objects here. So if you want to get access to the camera, you can't connect to it. The only way you can actually connect to it is when you're embedded. So if we convert back to embedded, now I can actually if I click it here, now you can see that I have the scene options. So I actually can find the main camera or any object that I want, and I can actually drag it in here, and it's going to connect it like that. So that's, I guess that's the only benefit. Sorry. That's the only benefit I see that of using embedded. But I mean, and apart from having to create a file for each graph that you have in the game. But you can use either one, so you can use either a graph or a variable. Just know that if you're using multiple copies of that object, then you probably want to use a graph. I end up using embedded most of the time because I end up having many game objects referenced in my flows. Yeah, so when you have a lot of reference to objects, then yeah, you want to use an embedded. Okay, so now let's actually I still just to let you guys know, but I still use embedded for prefabs as well, and the reason why I use prefabs is for referencing child objects. So if I want to actually reference a child object inside or something like that, then I would use an embedded that is attached to a prefab. The problem with that one is if sometimes it doesn't update wherever the prefabs are used, it actually does not update the graph. So you might get into the problem like you change the prefab values, but then the value that you use in the graph or the embedded graph that you're using in your scene already of that prefab, it doesn't get updated. So in that case, you have to go and click restart for it to actually copy the graph, embedded graph from the prefab. Just let you guys know. Okay, so now I want to go to the pickup logic that I have for my graph. So in my template, I have graphs, and whenever I load map, transition timer, I have a collect graph, and in here, this is where it's responsible for picking up that item. And I already do have my send an event picked up item, but let's not actually reuse that one. Let's actually use another one. So instead of using that one, let's use add time. Well, actually add time. I need to use the one with data actually. So add time. And for data, we're passing a float. So let's say we'll give a 5. No. Yeah. Well, 5 is not going to be that challenging. So let's say we'll give 5, add 5 points, add 5 time, I guess, each time you pick it up. And the item, it's not going to be as challenging. So if you want to make the game more challenging, then you can decrease that value. So now each time you collect, you can see that the time actually increases. So we got a running timer, but you saw that it continued running after we have collected everything. So what's the next part is actually how do you stop the timer? So you can see now that like even in this example, you take a step at a time. You create one part of it, and then you see what else you need to create. You don't focus on the, I guess, a big picture. Although planning is important, I like to actually plan what you want to do and stuff like that. But when just starting, you kind of don't even know what to plan for. So you'll get better eventually the more practice you get. I'm going to be dealing with effects next. Basic on effects like fog or glowing. Thank you so much for this topic tutorial. Can you make it for Android too? Yeah, if you're using Unity, you can build a game out for anything. So you could just go to build settings and switch. I actually have it selected as Android right now. And if I connect my device, it's actually gonna, when I build and run it, it's gonna actually run it on my device. So you can build the games to whatever device that or platform that you're actually looking for. Okay, so try to remember where I've put the logic of checking if I have picked up all the should be under level. Okay, level. So the logic for checking if I have picked up all the items or not is right here. So current and count collect amount. This is check for if items are found. And when all the items are found, then I trigger this. But I want to trigger an event. So let's send no data. Just call it done. Let's use uppercase. It's just done, and then in here, in this timer, I can actually listen for that event and stop the timer. So to stop the timer, you can use a toggle. The reason why I use a toggle flow. The reason why I use a toggle is so that you you don't have to create your own value, because it actually creates a variable there that it turns on and turn off. The only thing that I'm interested in is actually when it's done to turn it off. So do it like that, and then when it's off, you don't do anything, but if it's on, then you run through this logic. Now you can also use this to pause and unpause. So in here you can actually add another event and say like pause timer. Let's actually keep them together. Oh. Pause timer, and then restart. Not restart, but resume. Resume. And that turns back on. So this is going to add the ability of pausing and resuming timer. So if you want to add pause in your game, you can do that. And I think that is it. That's basically all the features that you would want the timer to have. So in here, we can, like I said, we can actually use the send an event, send with no data, send an event and say timer ran out. Is ran out one? I don't know if it's one word or not, but basically that's pretty much it. You can say timer ran out, and you can actually connect it without a sequence. You can just connect it like that. If you want to make sure that the text actually is going to display 00 before you do anything with this event, then you probably want to use a sequence. The sequence will make sure that this is going to get executed first because it's in the first spot, and then after this is done, then it's going to execute this. Otherwise, it's going to be whatever is in here is going to be executed first, and then the timer is going to be executed. The update in the value is going to be executed. So that is right there a timer for you guys. My voice is 1% in 100. I have not changed settings. Oh. Probably a little bit too far from the mic. How did you learn Visual Script? You learn just by making projects. So just choose a project you want to make and start trying out making the project, and that's the best way to learn, is to actually do something. So you can see that the timer starts with 0 and it's not doing anything, and it's because I need to start on by default here. So that's the option I forgot to turn on. I thought it was on by default for some reason, but I guess it's not. So you need to make sure you turn that on for the toggle. So there you go, 5 seconds. And the timer stops. If we let it run out, it runs out, but we have no nothing that prevents it from actually continue running. So, well, not running it, but from it to add time now. So if I click add time, it actually restarts again. So if you actually want to allow that, then you can do that, leave it like that. But if you don't, the only problem that we have here is because we use the once unit, it's not going to actually set it to 0. So it's just going to start from running it. But because of the rounding that we are doing here, it's actually still going to display 0, 0. Do you have video going over how much money and how you release or launch your games? No, I don't have that. I mean, I do have a publishing tutorials, but that's pretty much it. But I don't actually, I don't have videos on how much money you make from a published game or with that. So I think that is pretty much it. That what about controls? What controls are we talking about? Thanks so much for this tutorial. You can make it for Android controls. So controls. So in this game, the only controls that I'm using is a mouse click. So if you click on an event, that's the only thing that I'm using. And in Unity, they are actually converting touch and mouse controls to be triggered to trigger the mouse clicks as well. So if you just use a mouse, if whatever you can do with a mouse, you can do with a touch. So the left button is the same thing as a touch button. Although they do say that it's a better performance if you actually use a touch listener instead. That is the case with the old input system. The new input system, I'm not entirely sure how if there is a difference between mouse touch and a touch. Maybe they have fixed that problem. The performance that they say that is the problem. I was thinking. Okay, so I'm thinking of actually editing this live stream and making it like one of the tutorials and publishing it, but we'll see that. Thanks for stopping by. Hope this helps someone. So if anyone in need of timer, then you can rewatch this video and recreate a timer.